At Christmas Eve, my family locked the front door, turned on every Christmas light inside the house, and left me standing alone in the rain. The lights were bright, too bright. White and gold wrapped around the staircase railing, blinking in a steady pattern I recognized from years past. Someone had adjusted the timer recently. The rhythm was tighter now, more deliberate. Through the glass, I could see the tree fully lit ornaments catching the glow and throwing it back at the walls. The house looked warm, finished, occupied. Outside, the rain soaked through my coat in minutes. The lock engaged with a clean mechanical click. No argument, no raised voices, just the sound of a decision being completed. A suitcase followed mine, sliding across the porch boards before stopping at my feet. The handle was turned inward as if to make it easier for me to pick up. Behind the glass, my younger brother lifted his phone. I saw the screen light up before I heard his voice. "Let's see how the old woman survives this," he said, laughing softly, like this was content he'd been waiting to film. The camera steadied, the red recording dot appeared. A curtain shifted on the second-floor window. My mother stood there for a moment, not fully visible. Then the fabric moved again, slow and careful, until the light disappeared behind it. Earlier that day, at exactly 4:17 p.m., I had received an email titled Notice of Termination. It listed my employee ID, my final access time, and a paragraph thanking me for my years of service. 28 years condensed into a PDF. I closed my laptop, placed my security badge on the desk, and drove south without turning on the radio. By the time I reached Savannah, the rain had started and did not let up. I didn't knock on the door. I already had the answer. I picked up the suitcase. The zipper snagged as it always did near the corner. I made a mental note about it the way I always had logged the problem, handle it later. Inside, the Christmas lights continued blinking, obedient to the program someone had set. If you've ever been turned away by your own family when you needed them most, stay with me. And if you're watching from somewhere tonight, leave the name of your city. I want to know I'm not the only one. The porch light clicked off. The rain filled the silence it left behind. I stepped down into the street. Water ran along the curb in a narrow line, carrying pine needles and scraps of wrapping paper from earlier celebrations. I walked until the house disappeared from view, counting my steps without meaning to. When my fingers began to stiffen, I stopped beneath a street lamp and set the suitcase down. Some endings don't announce themselves. They just lock, light up, and move on without you. I didn't go far after I left the porch. 2 blocks down there was a cafe that stayed open late for tourists who didn't know when to stop walking. The windows were fogged. Inside, the lights were dimmer than the house I'd just left, but they were steady. I ordered coffee I didn't drink and sat with my hands around the cup until the heat faded. When the rain softened, I checked my phone. There was one missed call from my father, no message. The call came again at 8:12 p.m. I answered because that was still a habit then. He didn't ask where I was. He didn't lower his voice. He spoke the way he always had when he thought clarity mattered more than comfort. "I need you to understand something," he said. "This isn't emotional. It's administrative." I pictured him standing in the kitchen, the marble counter cleared, the paperwork laid out in a neat stack. He liked a clean surface when decisions were final. He told me he had transferred all family assets to Caleb earlier that afternoon. The accounts, the house, the trust. He listed them the way someone reads inventory. There was a pause between each item, long enough to confirm I was still listening. "The will has been amended," he said. "Notarized. Filed. It's irreversible." I looked at the surface of the coffee. A thin skin had formed. I broke it with a spoon and set the spoon back on the saucer. The sound was small. I focused on that. His reason came next, delivered without emphasis. "You no longer produce results." It wasn't an insult. It was a metric. He went on explaining that Caleb's ventures required capital and that continuity mattered. That risk had to be concentrated, not divided. That families failed when sentiment interfered with structure. He said my age as if it were a category. He said independence as if it were a deadline I had missed. I didn't interrupt. I didn't ask for copies. I didn't ask if there was anything to contest. The way he spoke made it clear those questions would be treated as inefficiencies. When he finished, there was a brief silence. I could hear the television in the background, a game show laugh track cutting in and out. Someone my brother maybe laughed again. The sound traveled easily. "I wanted you to hear it from me," my father said. "That's all." After we hung up, I paid for the coffee and left the cup half full. Outside, the rain had thinned to a mist. The street reflected the lights in long, broken lines. I walked to a bench near the river and sat until my phone vibrated again. This time, it was a notification. An email from a law firm I recognized by name. Subject: confirmation of amendment. The body was brief. Attached were PDFs stamped with dates and signatures. The notary seal was clean. The language was precise. There were no adjectives. I scrolled without zooming in. I didn't need to read every line to understand what had been done. The file size told me enough. A message followed from my brother. A single word. Handled. I set the phone face down on the bench. The river moved in the dark, steady and unconcerned. Somewhere behind me, a door closed. Somewhere else, another one stayed locked. There are moments when your role changes without ceremony. No argument marks it. No witness objects. The record updates and the world adjusts around it. I wiped the rain from the bench with my sleeve and moved on. I left the river and followed the streets inland the way you do when there's nothing left to wait for. Savannah at night moves slowly. Brick sidewalks slick with rain. Gas lamps humming faintly. The past set out like a museum that never closes. I walked past plaques I'd read before, names and dates pressed into metal, remembering things that had survived storms and fires and wars because someone decided they mattered. The rain came down fine and persistent, not heavy enough to force shelter, just enough to settle into seams and hems. I adjusted the suitcase handle again. It clicked into place on the third try. I kept walking. Every house I passed was awake. Warm windows, tables set, trees glowing in corners, ornaments catching light and holding it. Through one window, I saw a man refilling glasses while someone else laughed at something on television. Through another, a woman adjusted a ribbon on a wreath, stepping back to see if it sat straight. The doors were solid, the locks invisible from the outside. At the corner of Habersham, I stopped under an awning and checked the time. 9:03 p.m. My phone battery was at 42%. I turned off background refresh and lowered the brightness. There was no need to rush the drain. 2 blocks later, the bus stop appeared. It wasn't on the schedule anymore. The sign had been removed, leaving 4 clean holes in the metal frame where it used to hang. The bench remained. Wood slats, damp but intact. A plastic roof arched overhead, clouded with age. I sat and set the suitcase at my feet, angled so the wheels wouldn't roll. A bus passed without slowing. Its windows were fogged, the interior lights bright. I watched it go and counted the seconds until the sound faded. When the quiet returned, it felt organized, as if it had been waiting its turn. I took off my coat and folded it once, then twice, and placed it beside me. The fabric was heavier with water than it should have been. I smoothed the sleeve flat the way I used to straighten documents before filing. The habit didn't require an office. Across the street, a house had left its porch light on. The beam cut through the rain and ended at the curb. I sat just outside it. Not invited, not chased away. The space in between. I thought about the file attachments on my phone, the stamps, the seals, the language that did not raise its voice. I thought about the word handled and how it closes conversations. I made a note of the time again. 9:27 p.m. The night was still young enough to be long. When the rain shifted direction, I moved closer to the center of the bench. The wood creaked, then settled. I listened to it, cataloging the sound. Somewhere nearby, a door opened and closed. Somewhere else, footsteps hurried, then stopped. A car alarm chirped once and fell silent. It occurred to me without drama that there was no address waiting for me to return to. Not tonight, not tomorrow. The realization didn't land all at once. It assembled itself from details: the removed sign, the passing bus, the light that stopped short of my shoes. I sat there until the bench felt like part of the street and the rain felt like a schedule. For the first time, I understood what it meant to belong nowhere. Not as a metaphor, as a location. I left the bench when the rain began to settle into the wood, not because it was uncomfortable, but because it had finished telling me what it was. The street had thinned, fewer cars, fewer footsteps, the hour when places closed not with announcements but with routine. I walked inland again and stopped when I saw the church. It sat back from the road, brick darkened by moisture, a single exterior light burning above the side entrance. The door was closed. The sign out front listed service times in block letters that had been replaced recently, clean font, evenly spaced. Someone maintained it. Someone expected people to return. That was when I noticed the man. He stood near the steps, not under the light, but just beyond it where the glow fell off. Elderly, thin, leaning on a cane that looked older than he was. No coat, just a sweater pulled tight at the wrists. His breath showed each time he exhaled, short and shallow, like he was measuring it. I stopped because he didn't move when he saw me. He didn't flinch. He didn't ask. He waited until I was close enough to hear him without raising his voice. "Excuse me," he said. "Do you know if there's a shelter nearby that still has space?" That was all. No story, no explanation, no request for cash. Just a question asked politely as if I were an employee behind a counter and he was trying not to take too much time. I told him I didn't know, which was true. I hadn't checked. I hadn't needed to, yet. He nodded once, accepting the answer the way people do when they've already prepared for it. Up close, I could see his hands shaking, not dramatically, not for effect. The kind of tremor that comes from cold settling too deep. His knuckles were pale. His skin had taken on that gray-blue tone that shows up before anyone comments on it. "I'm Howard," he said, as if names were still part of the process. I told him mine. We didn't shake hands. His were occupied with the cane. Mine were still stiff from the rain. He had served once, he said. Long time ago. He didn't specify where. He didn't list dates. Veterans who need something don't usually do that unless asked. He said he'd been staying with someone temporarily. That arrangement had ended earlier than expected. He said it the way people say a contract wasn't renewed. I looked past him at the church door. Still closed, no notice posted, no number to call. The light above it flickered once, then steadied. I checked the time. 9:41 p.m. The shelters I knew of closed intake earlier. The policies were consistent. I said so. He listened without interrupting, nodding again as if I were confirming what he already suspected. He thanked me anyway. That was when I noticed how carefully he was standing. Weight distributed, cane placed precisely, conserving energy the way people do when they know they'll need it later. He wasn't panicking. He was planning, with limited data, with limited options. I offered him my coat, not as charity, as a transfer of resources. He hesitated, then accepted after I insisted once. No speech, no gratitude that lingered too long. He folded it the way I had folded it on the bench earlier, deliberate, respectful. "I'll return it," he said. "You don't need to," I told him. "Just keep moving." He smiled at that, briefly, like someone who recognized the instruction. We stood there another moment, the rain easing into mist. Two people without an address for the night occupying the edge of a building that still believed in doors. Then he turned and walked south, the cane tapping softly against the pavement, each step measured. I watched until he disappeared past the corner. When I left, the church remained exactly as it was, locked, lit, and certain of its schedule. I didn't go far after he left. I stood where the church light thinned into shadow, listening to the cane fade into the rain. The building behind me remained locked, certain of its hours. The street ahead stayed open, indifferent. Nothing required my decision yet, that I knew wouldn't last. The mist thickened. It worked its way through seams again, slower this time, as if testing what was left. I checked my phone. 9:56 p.m. Battery at 38%. Enough. I put it back in my pocket without opening anything else. There was nothing new that needed confirming. I realized then that I was colder than I had been all night. Not suddenly, gradually. The kind of cold that doesn't announce itself until movement becomes inefficient. I adjusted my grip on the suitcase. The handle was steady, the wheels aligned, the system still functioned. I thought of Mr. Howard's hands, the tremor that hadn't asked permission, the way his skin had gone pale without complaint, the way he'd accepted information, the way contracts accept amendments without argument, only recalculation. I took off my sweater. It was the only warm layer I had left. Wool, old, neutral color. I'd worn it long enough that the cuffs held the shape of my wrists. I wrapped it once around my arms before I crossed the street just to confirm what I was giving up. Then I turned back the way I'd come. He was still within sight, slower now, the cane placing limits on distance. I called out once, not loud. He stopped when he heard it. I didn't explain. I didn't hesitate. I stepped close enough to place the sweater around his shoulders and pulled it tight the way you do when weather makes decisions faster than people. He started to protest out of habit. I raised one hand not to stop him, just to indicate completion. The action was already finished. He looked at me for a long moment, not at the sweater, at my face. Rain moved between us, quiet and consistent. The church light behind me hummed. Somewhere nearby, a car door closed. Normal sounds. A city keeping its schedule. "You still have dignity," he said. "Don't lose it." He didn't say thank you. He didn't ask my name again. He didn't offer reassurance. The sentence landed cleanly, like a clause inserted exactly where it belonged. Too precise for a stranger. Too measured to be casual. Then he turned and walked back into the rain. I stood there after he was gone, noting the absence of weight on my shoulders. The cold registered immediately, efficiently. I accepted it the same way I'd accepted other changes that night, by adjusting posture and continuing forward. I crossed the street again and didn't look back at the church. The door would still be closed. The light would still be on. Buildings don't reconsider. A block away, I found a 24-hour diner with one window lit and the rest dark. Inside, a woman wiped the counter in slow circles. She didn't look up when I entered. I ordered tea. It arrived too hot to drink. I wrapped my hands around the mug anyway and waited for it to cool. On the television mounted above the counter, a late-night news anchor spoke about weather patterns moving up the coast. Rain totals, advisories, objective language. I appreciated that. I thought again about the sentence. Dignity, not as pride, as maintenance, as keeping records straight, as not trading long-term structure for short-term relief. When the tea cooled, I drank it. When it was finished, I paid and left. Outside, the rain had thinned further, the way storms do when they've said what they came to say. I walked on without the sweater. By the time I reached the end of the block, I understood the choice I'd made. Not generosity, not sacrifice, allocation. And for the first time that night, the path ahead felt deliberate. I kept walking until the streets thinned into frontage roads and the buildings lost their names. By the time I reached the highway, the rain had reduced itself to residue water left behind on concrete, reflective and unclaimed. A motel sign flickered ahead. Vacancy. One word, no embellishment. The room cost less than the suitcase wheels. I paid in advance. The clerk slid the key across the counter without asking questions, eyes already moving to the next task. The receipt printed, time stamped. Transaction complete. I noted the number out of habit and put it in my pocket. Inside, the room was clean in the way places are when they expect no one to stay long. One bed, a desk bolted to the wall, a television mounted too high. The lamp gave off a thin yellow light that stopped short of the corners. I set the suitcase by the door and didn't open it. There was nothing inside I needed immediately. I showered and let the water run until it went lukewarm. I used the small bar of soap provided and folded the towel twice before hanging it back up. The mirror was spotted. I didn't wipe it. I didn't need clarity there. I slept without dreaming. In the morning, I woke before the alarm I hadn't set. The light outside was flat and undecided. I made coffee using the packet on the tray and drank it standing up. It cooled quickly. I finished it anyway. I opened my laptop and began applying for work. I didn't target ambition. I targeted stability. Positions with defined hours. Clear reporting lines. Benefits listed in bullet points. I uploaded the same resume dozens of times, adjusting file names to meet different portals. I filled out forms that asked me to retype information already contained in the document. I did it without irritation. Systems prefer redundancy. Days passed like that. Morning applications, afternoon follow-ups, evenings reviewing postings that had already expired. I tracked submissions in a spreadsheet. Company, role, date, status. Most stayed blank. None came back. Occasionally, I received automated acknowledgments, polite language, no commitments. Phrases like, "We'll keep your information on file." I archived them after reading. The folder filled evenly. I didn't speak about the night with anyone. Not to acquaintances, not to former colleagues. There was no strategic advantage in narration. Events don't gain legitimacy by being repeated. I also didn't look for the man again. not out of indifference, out of accuracy. The encounter hadn't created an obligation on either side. There was nothing to complete. Kindness, if it was, that had already done its work by ending where it did. I stayed in the motel longer than planned because the rate was consistent and the staff didn't rotate much. Familiarity reduces friction. On the fourth morning, the woman who cleaned rooms left an extra towel on the handle without comment. I nodded when I saw her in the hall later. That was enough. One afternoon, a message appeared from a company I barely remembered applying to. Not an offer, a request for availability, dates, times, interview format. I replied within 10 minutes and closed the laptop. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to traffic move past the window. Trucks downshifting, tires on wet asphalt, a steady working sound. I understood then that this was the lowest point, not because of deprivation, but because of clarity. There were no illusions left to maintain, no roles to perform, no doors to test. I stood in that small room with nothing claimed and nothing owed and let the quiet hold. It was enough to stand on. I was packing the laptop when the phone rang. Not an unknown number, local clean. I answered because the day had already given me everything it was going to withhold. "Miss Carter," the woman asked. Her voice was level, practiced, not warm, not abrupt. "This is Margaret Sloan. I'm an attorney. I need to confirm your location." I didn't ask how she had my number. I gave her the motel address and room number. She repeated it back, corrected my pronunciation of the street, and said she would arrive shortly. No explanation followed. The line disconnected without ceremony. I looked around the room. The desk was still bolted to the wall. The bedspread still patterned to hide stains. The coffee cup from that morning sat empty beside the sink, ringed at the bottom where it had cooled too long. Nothing suggested a change in circumstances. I zipped the suitcase. The zipper caught once, then moved. I set it upright and waited. 10 minutes later, the sound reached the room before the sight did, engines idling in sequence, then shutting down one by one. Through the thin curtains, shadows moved across the parking lot. I stepped outside. 12 black Lincoln sedans had pulled in, aligned with unnecessary precision. Not rental cars, not ride shares. The kind of vehicles that arrive with paperwork already prepared. Drivers remained inside, hands on wheels, eyes forward. Margaret Sloan stood near the center of the lock coat, buttoned leather folder under her arm. She nodded once when she saw me. No greeting, no smile. She gestured toward the far end of the formation. That was when I saw him. He stepped out of the last car without assistance. No cane, no hesitation. His posture was upright. His hands were steady. The sweater I had given him was gone, replaced by a dark overcoat cut to measure. He adjusted the cuff once, a small, precise movement, then closed the door behind him. The rain had stopped. The pavement was drying in uneven patches, the sky lifting toward gray. He looked at me the same way he had outside the church, not searching, not apologetic, observant, as if confirming a variable. Margaret spoke again. "Before we proceed," she said, "I need to establish that you recognize this individual." I did. I said nothing. She opened the folder and removed a document clipped at the corner. Heavy paper, original seal. She didn't hand it to me yet. For the record, she continued, "This meeting was initiated at his request, not yours." The man walked closer. The distance closed without urgency. When he stopped, it was exactly an arm's length away. "You did what you needed to do," he said. Same voice, different temperature. "Now it's my turn." No one raised a phone. No one spoke out of sequence. A driver adjusted his mirror. Somewhere a door closed softly. Margaret finally held out the document. "There are matters that were delayed," she said. "Incorrect assumptions, improper filings. We're here to correct them." I took the paper. My name was printed at the top. Correctly. Beneath it were dates I recognized and some I didn't. I looked up once more. The man met my eyes, not as a stranger, not as a benefactor, as something else entirely. Behind us, the motel sign flickered. Vacancy. Nothing else moved, and for the first time since that night, I understood the turn had already begun. Margaret Sloan waited until I had finished scanning the first page before she spoke again. She did not rush me. Attorneys who know the outcome rarely do. The individual you met outside the church, she said, is Walter Howard. The name carried weight without emphasis. I had seen it before on buildings, on scholarship letters, on endowments listed in annual reports. It belonged to a national charitable trust with a footprint large enough to be mistaken for permanence. Walter stood slightly to my right, hands, folded, eyes on the pavement. He did not confirm or deny anything yet. He let the record speak first. Margaret continued. Mr. Howard founded the trust 40 years ago. Since then, he has personally conducted an annual review process, informal, unannounced, unpublished. She turned a page in the folder and pointed to a paragraph. Every Christmas Eve, he presents himself as an individual with no resources, no identification, no visible leverage. The conditions vary, the principle does not. I read. The language was clinical, dates, locations, observations logged without commentary. He does not ask for money, she said. He asks for information, direction, a response that carries no social reward. Walter shifted his weight once. The movement was minimal. For 40 years, Margaret said, no one has passed. I reached the final page. The paper was heavier there, as if the printer knew something had to hold. This year, she said, one person did. No one reacted. There was no pause for effect. Facts do not need it. Walter finally spoke. It was never about generosity, he said. People confuse the two. He looked at me then. Not appraising, not grateful, attentive. The trust doesn't need donors, he said. It needs stewards. People who understand boundaries. People who don't confuse access with entitlement. I thought of the sentence he had given me in the rain. Dignity. Maintenance. I did not say that aloud. Margaret slid a second document forward. Not a contract, a proposal. Clear scope. Defined authority. Oversight mechanisms listed in detail. The role is operational, she said. No public recognition. No discretionary vanity. You would manage compliance, distribution review, and audit coordination. The board has been informed. They will defer. Walter added, this isn't an offer as reward. I know, I said. He nodded once. That was enough. I chose Christmas, he said, because people reveal themselves when they believe nothing can be recovered. When warmth is accounted for elsewhere. I thought of doors locked with confidence. Lights left on for those inside. Policies enforced without witnesses. I don't need loyalty, he said. I need accuracy. The motel lot was quiet again. The drivers remained in their cars. Engines off, doors closed. I read the final line of the proposal. Start date, January 2nd. No signing bonus, no severance clause. Accountability spelled out to the end. I'll need time to review, I said. You'll have it, Margaret replied. Nothing here expires tonight. Walter extended his hand. Steady, dry. You already know how to walk away, he said. That's the qualification. I shook his hand. Once. The cars did not move after that. They waited until Walter returned to the last sedan and the door closed. Then they departed, in order, leaving the lot as they had found it. Margaret gave me her card and left separately. I stood alone again, holding the folder. The vacancy sign flickered once and steadied. For the first time in years, nothing was being taken from me, only entrusted. They found me after the paperwork settled. It took longer than I expected. Months, not weeks. Failure moves slowly when it has been insulated by confidence. Caleb's investments unraveled in sequence, first the speculative real estate fund, then the leveraged equipment leases, then the private notes no one admitted were unsecured until they were. By the time the filings became public, the numbers no longer argued. Losses were documented, accounts frozen, credit withdrawn. My parents' house followed on a separate timeline, property taxes deferred then called, a line of credit converted, notices posted in plain envelopes that did not raise their voices, the kind of mail that arrives quietly and leaves marks. They came to me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my apartment, a place I had chosen for its light and its lack of history. The kettle had boiled and shut itself off. I poured water over a tea bag and let it steep longer than recommended. When the knock came, it was measured, not urgent, not tentative, familiar in the way habits are. I opened the door. My mother stood closest, purse held in both hands as if it contained instructions. My father was half a step behind her. Caleb stayed near the stairwell looking at the floor. No one crossed the threshold. "We need to talk," my father said. I nodded and waited. They spoke in fragments: cash flow, timing, temporary setbacks, words designed to suggest reversibility. My mother asked if I was working. My father asked if I still had contacts. Caleb said nothing. I listened without interrupting. The tea cooled on the counter. The room stayed quiet enough to hear the building's elevator open and close down the hall. When they finished, my father said my name once the way he used to when he wanted to establish alignment. "We're family," he said. "We wouldn't be here if there were other options." That part was accurate. I did not ask for apologies. I did not revisit the night of the door or the language of administration. There was no need to litigate memory. The present had enough documentation. I told them I couldn't provide funds. I said it plainly, without qualifiers. I did not mention capacity or future review. I closed that sentence where it belonged. My mother's hands tightened on her purse. Caleb looked up then, briefly. My father inhaled as if preparing a counterpoint. I continued before it arrived. I handed them a folder. Inside was a list: community legal aid, housing counseling services, a foreclosure mediation program with intake hours listed in block letters, a financial literacy nonprofit that specialized in restructuring personal debt, phone numbers, addresses, eligibility notes, the same resources I had compiled earlier for someone else, updated for accuracy. "I can help you navigate these," I said. "I can't change outcomes." My father stared at the list as if it were written in another language. My mother asked if this was a joke. I shook my head once. Caleb finally spoke. "So that's it. That's what's available," I said. There was a pause long enough for the kettle to click as it cooled completely. Outside, a door closed somewhere on the floor below. Ordinary sounds. No witnesses. My mother took the folder. My father did not reach for it. Caleb stepped back toward the stairs. "We raised you," my father said. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm being precise." They left without raising their voices. No scene. No last words designed to travel. I closed the door and turned the lock. The sound was small and finished. I stood in the quiet of a space that belonged to me and understood the difference between help and rescue. One preserves dignity, the other postpones accountability. That afternoon, I finished my tea. I didn't see them again for several months. Not because they disappeared, but because schedules do what boundaries used to. Work filled the days. Meetings ended when agendas were complete. Decisions were recorded, signed, archived. Life took on the quiet shape of something maintained. The invitation arrived by mail, not email. Heavy paper, clean margins. An opening ceremony for a senior housing center funded through the trust. Date, time, address. My name listed without title. Speaker. The morning of the event, the sky was clear in a way that felt procedural. No weather to negotiate. I arrived early and stood in the lobby while staff adjusted chairs into straight rows. A volunteer tested the microphone. The sound checked out. I waited where I was told to wait. The building was modest, brick, glass doors that reflected the street without exaggeration. Inside, the light was even. No corners left dim. I watched residents arrive slowly, deliberately assisted when needed, independent when possible. Paper programs folded once, then again, tucked into pockets. When it was time, I stepped to the podium. I did not scan the crowd. I placed my notes flat and aligned them with the edge, though I didn't plan to read. Habits persist when they work. I spoke about timelines, about permits and inspections, about how long it takes to convert funding into walls and heat and locks that turn from the inside. I spoke about systems that fail quietly and the importance of noticing before they do. No applause lines, just information. Near the back, movement registered. My parents stood together, not holding hands. Caleb was not with them. They did not step forward. They did not leave. They occupied the space allowed. I didn't acknowledge them directly. There was no reason to. Recognition is not always reciprocal. At the end, I said one sentence, not louder than the rest. Real family is the place that doesn't leave you in the rain. The microphone carried it evenly. No emphasis added, no pause engineered. The sentence stood on its own. I stepped away from the podium. The ribbon was cut by someone else. Photographs were taken without me in them. Staff opened the doors and guided residents inside. I followed with the group, not at the front, not at the back. The interior smelled new and neutral. Fresh paint, clean air. Behind me, the doors closed. The sound was controlled. Hydraulic. Final. Inside the hallway stretched straight ahead. Doors evenly spaced, numbers clearly marked. A place where addresses mattered again. I walked until the noise of the gathering faded and stopped at a window that looked out onto the courtyard. Sunlight reached the bench there and stayed. I stood in that light and let the quiet settle. No one needed anything from me in that moment. No one was waiting outside. If this story reminded you that kindness still has a place in this world, hold on to it. Sometimes justice doesn't raise its voice, it simply arrives on time.